Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Percosta. I'm a professor of psychology. As the chair of the CLA Council, I'm moderating this town hall, and I'm starting out with an introduction. We have a special guest today who will be speaking with us, and we will be addressing her with questions, both online and in person, and I will alternate those questions. But with no more further ado, Provost.
Hey, thanks everybody for coming out on a Friday afternoon and beautiful fall day here at Towson University. So, I don't really have significant introductory remarks, so I want to get to your questions. I saw some of the questions in advance, but I'm sure there are other questions here in the room. If you had a chance today to go over to the research conference, really cool. Got to see a lot of interesting research from our faculty, in particular. Really interesting interdisciplinary conversations are going on. So it's a great opportunity. If you didn't get there this year, get it on your calendar for next year's great event. So with that, I will throw it open, turn to Maria, however you want to go. And
what I would like to do is start with a question from the audience, and then I have questions that were submitted online anonymously. So are there any in?
So one of the things that I'm hearing a lot and seeing in my classes is incredible absenteeism and late not submitted work. I mean, unlike year 16 for me here, this is unlike even during the pandemic.
yeah,
What are we doing as a university to deal with that? There seems to be no more culture of going to class. Obviously, students are struggling with lots of things, just like faculty are. But what are we doing as a university to create that culture again of people coming to class?
so it's a great question, and you're not the first person to make that observation. I haven't seen any clear data, but it's anecdotally, this seems to be something that's carries across campus. So here's what I have, multiple responses to it, but the first response is obviously we know that the correlation between actually coming to class and passing. It's pretty close correlation. And so I used to have to talk to many parents whose kids flunked out, and they'd be like, it's all because of the professors, they're terrible. And like, oh, the odds that you got every single professor that your kid has is terrible are not very high. The real answer is your kid didn't go to class. And so, I've always had these discussions with parents and students that the number one thing you gotta do to pass, go to class. But so there are lots of interventions that we can do, certainly as a university, and we have, and so I have some very specific ideas about it. I'm happy to share if anyone cares about my specific ideas. But there's also, we created this year, as part of the enrollment management plan, a student success council, and that has a bunch of different faculty. It's got people from student affairs, it's got people advising, registrar, like a whole group of people looking at these very issues around retention, and graduation, how to not only retain students, but how to graduate them in increasing numbers. And so this absenteeism, of course, would be number one thing to correct. So before I say any ideas that I might have, I want to turn to you and say, what ideas do you have? What do you think we can do? We can do? You can do to address it?
I have a suggestion or a comment. What I'm worried about is some level of consistency across faculty, across departments, across colleges with regard to attendance and participation in their syllabi and kind of maintaining that. Because I do think that there's something, if I have an attendance policy and my colleague doesn't have an attendance policy, and I'm requiring them to come, they're not gonna go to that class, they're not required. Of course, and then I'm not gonna look like a great teacher because I'm making them come, but I do think that maybe something like some level of consistency across faculty in terms of having a policy that you stick to.
Okay. Good. Yep.
I just have a question, like I think the handbook has something that, but are you meaning having to have attendance and participation in grades, or just a policy in the civil districts that's expected to come? Which are you referring to?
I think that you have to have a policy about attendance and participation. But I don't know that one has to have, and again, I'm just throwing out.
Sure, yeah.
I really thought this through
Yeah.
completely, so, but I do think that something about attendance, and I know we have it in our documents, but I don't think it's maintained consistently across faculty.
I just
and
wasn't sure if you were saying make everyone have a grade.
No, I'm just saying have a policy so that they know that attendance is, and indicating how attendance is correlated to passing.
And I have.
And
found
make
that
it so.
in the last few years before COVID and now, that I don't have an attendance or participation grade, but I found that taking attendance increased the attendance. Now, I'm still having problems this semester, and it's worse this semester than in other semesters too. But somehow, like, students know that I notice they're not there. And conversely, they know that I acknowledge when they are, and that seems to help a little bit, but there is something, I don't know, maybe in the water, because my class up at Tune had 100% Wednesday, so maybe it's something in the water here or something.
I would just say that, the problem was bad enough in my department, that the department decided to have a department policy that we've agreed on and voted on together, and this was a couple of weeks ago. And it was because, you know, everyone was coming in saying it's demoralizing to teach when you have a 30-person class and 7 people show up. And it's just demoralizing.
Yeah.
But also people who had, you know, quite strict policies were being kind of attacked for being mean and unkind and unfair and all these things. It was like, okay, we make it a department policy, we can just drop that in and say, talk to the chair. It's a department policy.
Yeah, so that.
It's not considered. The rush to figure out a solution without figuring out what the problem is a concern for me. And so how do we get to the root of the problem rather than putting a system in place to police the problem?
It's a great point you make, and so I actually have some suggestions that account for that, and account for that, and account for that, and maybe account for that. So some of the things that one of the things that I would strongly suggest is that, to that point, we have to figure out what the root of the problem is, and the answer is probably gonna be different for each student. And so how the heck do you do this mechanically? How do you if you have 125 students in the class, it's a more daunting task, of course. So here are some things that I would suggest. First and foremost, everybody should take attendance. This has been a bugaboo of mine since I've been. Now, I'm not going to make a policy. That's not my role as a provost. I don't think that's, if I were a faculty member and a provost came in and told me what my attendance policy was going to be, I'd be ticked off. That's not my role, and I don't think it should be. I think you should determine this. But since you asked, I'm going to tell you my opinion. I think you should all have attendance policies, because when you say things like, and I've had professors like this for sure. And you know what? When I started my career, I might have said the same thing. Listen, you're all adults. I don't care if you come to class or not. Come, don't come, whatever. Like you hear that oftentimes. And what students hear are, I don't care about you. That's what they hear when you have that, right? And so if you have an attendance policy, it says. Right away, it says, I am paying attention to whether you come. I do make this important. I think it is important that you come, and I'm going to check on whether you come. So if you have an attendance policy, that's kind of step one. And I would highly recommend whatever works for you do, but I would highly recommend you have an attendance policy. It used to be that you would have to spend 15 minutes at the beginning of the class going, Christian, are you here? Right? And you do it and you check it off. The technology is you can do it in a second right now. You can do it digitally, you don't have to keep track of anything. One thing that Bassett would recommend to you is you start your class with a pre-class quiz. 3-question quiz about last night's reading or what you're discussing today, right? That quiz is your attendance. So boom, you killed 2, how many bushes were stones? And yeah, it's all I had for it. Then here's the thing. Now you got your attendance and you see these people are missing. Now what? What do I do? You're not a social worker, you have 125 students, you can't possibly reach out to them. So we have a team that will do that for you. It's the care team. And many people think that the care team is only meant for like severe crisis. Like I think that this student may be suicidal, and please do, of course, in any case like that, that of course is their job. But they also will, if you send a care report and you say, hey, listen, you know, I'm just concerned, this student has missed 4 classes and they're in danger of failing my class or something like that. Or you can even give them a list, so you don't have to send a zillion. Here are these 12 students that I've noticed have missed significant. That launches our student affairs team, and they will literally go out and contact that student. Many times, if they live in the res hall, they will literally knock on their door and say, here you're missing math class. And so they will do that intervention. So I'd suggest that as kind of step one. The second thing that we would really encourage you to do, and as we've been hearing this semester, you know, we took that student success council, said, all right, that's gotta be priority 1 right now. Let's look at this absenteeism and what we might do about it. I know people are not big fans of the SSC, the Student Success Collaborative, that little BAD product that they use in advising, and the numbers are kind of low on who uses that. But what that is it's a communication device. So if you email students, oftentimes they don't respond, right? You know what they respond to? Text. The SSC will send a text to your students, and you can group message all of those who are absent. Okay, so those are some effective things that we could do right now to get, I mean, it's pretty late in the semester, let's be honest. But these are things, what I would strongly encourage is you as faculty, get yourself together, just listen to what happened here just in a minute. Here's what I'm doing, well, here's what I'm doing, wait, that won't work in my class, well, this might work. Faculty conversations about a common problem, find that good solution. And there's gonna be people here who have ideas that have been super effective in their classes that I don't know about. And so I would encourage you to have some kind of summit or something, you know, maybe in January, devote an hour of a meeting to this particular problem. I'm happy to support however you want me. If you want me to work with Facet to arrange some kind of presentations, our advising group, they will come to any department. Our professional advisors, they'll come to your department and they will walk you through how to use SSC to do this. Dr. Hurt, the VPSA, says he will, if a department wants somebody from the care team to come to the department and talk about that work, they will do that. So there's a whole group of people interested in supporting folks. I think you'll just don't know about all those resources. So really happy to support it. It's a really important problem, and you know, thank you for addressing it.
Thank you for that. I just add one thing, which is
Sure.
a lot of the conversations I'm having with people is, in some ways, it's about perception and communication. That is, I think a lot of faculty are reluctant to do this because of COVID and wanting to be as forgiving of students as possible, which is why people have gotten rid of attendance policies, gotten rid of due dates for assignments. And it seems like the communication that they think they're hearing from the university, from student affairs, from your office, from deans, is you should still remain in that moment and let students, almost like we were a year and a half, 2 years. And I think people haven't been moved back in, that we need to be a little bit different now.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that if that's what the messaging is, or that's how it's being received, I apologize, because that's not really where I think we ought to be. Clearly, we should act with empathy, right? When a student is ill. One of the things I've heard that we do have an issue with student says, hey, I'm sick, I'm missing this test or whatever. And we've had some things where faculty are saying, well, like, okay, go to the health center and get a excuse note or whatever that says you're sick. That used to be TU policy. That hasn't been TU policy in years. So they don't do that. So we're literally sending them to do a task that can't happen. And so, then what, the student comes back and says, hey, they're not gonna give me that excuse. What's happened is some of the faculty say, well, they go to the doctor and get an excuse. And we're gonna, if we're actually interested in issues of equity, this is not great practice. When we are sick and we miss class, we would email the chair, I would imagine, and say, hey, listen, we're sick, I'm not coming in today. And you cancel the class or you get somebody to cover for you. But I've never heard of a chair who asked for a note. So my messaging is extend that same empathy, the same thing you would want for yourselves to the students. However, this is not endless empathy to where you miss 8 classes, but I'm still gonna pass you. Because sometimes the conversation with the student has to be, I genuinely believe you're sick. I know you're not fit. You know, pre-COVID, this conversation was kids with mono, right? How many people had this conversation? I believe you, but you've missed 7 weeks of my class. There's just no way you can pass at this point. So here's what I'd like to do for you. Let's do a medical withdrawal. It doesn't hurt your GPA. It comes out. It doesn't show up on your transcript. And that's what I can do for you. So that's sometimes the answer. Certainly not saying, hey, it doesn't matter, you missed half the semester, you're still gonna get a B. That's not the answer. Our standards still have to be high. And so we need to remember that pre-COVID, we had these same discussions around missing class and illness and things like that. And so let us sort of return back to that, extend empathy, because we've learned lessons from COVID. That we've learned that requiring somebody to go to a doctor to get a note is probably not the right thing to do. That's a lesson we should take. But certainly if people think the lesson is, we don't care about attendance, make sure that everybody passes. Please, that's certainly not my intent whatsoever. You gotta hold your standards, keep your standards high, help students reach your standards. But not by getting rid of your standards. All right, that was a long first question. 3 questions today, everybody. But
Everyone's here.
yeah, that's a really important question though, so thanks for asking that.
So the next one is actually gonna be another probably dissertation.
All right, I'll try to not do a history dissertation. Math.
We received, I received a number of questions regarding R2. And instead of going individually, I'm gonna kind of say in general.
Sure.
The questions revolved around if we're heading toward R2 and we currently don't have enough faculty for students to offer the courses so students can pass or can move on and graduate on time, it's potentially a problem. What's the message in terms of scholarly production? What are the new expectations? Because faculty are already engaged in high levels of productivity. What are the benefits to students? And last but not least is OSPR.
Oscar.
Yeah, is Oscar prepared?
Yeah.
For this increase or this change with regard to R2 requirements? So it's kind of a lot.
Sure,
going on
so you guys have to remind me. Yeah. So I think I answered a lot of these questions last time, but I'm happy, I think, it's such an important issue that it bears repeating. So I did see there was a sense that, or at least a sense in the questions that the number of students is growing and the number of faculty is dropping, and how, because of that, how can we possibly move to an R2? So first I want to just correct one record. We are down 2,500 students and faculty are flat. So in CLA, the numbers are that the number of student credit hours in the last 5 years has dropped 8.5%, and the faculty has stayed exactly the same. So the student faculty ratio has actually improved. Now, this is not a good measure. So that's not like a sole measure. This is not me saying, and so what are you complaining about, faculty, right? Because here's the key. Y'all were understaffed massively 5 years ago, right? So I know that. I'm the provost who came in here, ran the numbers and said, oh my God, we need a massive investment in academic affairs because we don't have enough faculty. So that's where, we talk about the academic affairs investment, $16 million and the money in R2. It's all based on data and what we believe would get us to the right faculty student ratio that puts us in with our R2 peers. And so when I see that, first of all, it's not great that we are getting a better faculty student ratio by students leaving, that's not a good way to get there. But that's the pandemic, right? That's what happened. And so there's a couple of things to think about there. So that does mean if you're down 2,500 students, that's about $22 million off the budget that's lost. And so you have to make, budget decisions based on the fact that been a significant drop. And, I'm pretty proud to say that not only have we not lost faculty, we've increased the numbers of faculty during this time, while other universities are closing departments. So I think we've done pretty well, but this is not me spiking any kind of football, because we know for sure that what that measure ought to be is different from what it was 5 years ago. You don't start on a, like, wow, we are way off, and say, what we gotta do is get back to that level, right? We wanna start where we are here and then do even more. So the challenge, of course, is we got here with a $22 million drop. So how do you sort of do these things? And so really what we're trying to do is do this a little bit over time. So there's no belief that R2 is going to happen next week, right? The whole idea is by 2027. And so how do we get investments, even in a tight budget time? How do we make increasing investments in the number of faculty, the dollars for graduate students, research support for faculty? And I can show you our razzle dazzle PowerPoint, but we have invested millions and millions of dollars in all of those things, even during the pandemic. And so we had a delay just slightly, like by about a year or so, about when those investments are going to happen, but they are happening. And so we understand, we get that there's got to be a different ratio in those kinds of investments. And so they are being made all around. And if you want to type of specifics, I'm happy to do that, but I do want to get to some of these other things. So what's in it for students?
What's the benefit for students?
Yeah, so there's a lot of benefit for students. Some of the areas where we actually have put investments is into undergraduate research. So that $5 million in research expenditures we have to hit. If you do undergraduate research, that counts as well. That counts towards that number. So we have doubled the funding for the undergraduate research programs on campus since we started this. And this last summer, we just launched the first residential undergraduate research experience, super cool. And a bunch of CLA students were involved. And so that program pays the students to do research. So they get free room and board on campus, and they get a stipend above it. And the faculty who are involved also got paid. And so it's programs like that are going to benefit the undergrads. The graduate students got an immediate boost in pay. So for the first time, we created research assistant graduate student positions. And so those are paid at $35,000 stipend and full benefits. That's a super competitive stipend for and benefits for grad students. That's what they're getting at UBC and Hopkins and other places around. So we feel that that's a big investment in those students. And then just sort of those general opportunities that they're going to get to work with faculty, work with other students on research. I mean, that's going to make them more competitive when they go out in the world. So there's a ton of benefits to them.
Related to that was, I think the question about, people or the questions stated that they were unsure about R2 designation, what it means for scholarly productivity, with the emphasis on grants. Is it expected that faculty engage in pursuing funding for grants? And related to that question is, since faculty are already engaged in high levels of research, what are there new expectations now?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. And again, I think I got this one last time, but I'll answer it again. There is no expectation, and I've shouted out high. There is no expectation that all faculty do grants. It's not appropriate for all faculty. The threshold of $5 million, it's nothing. The reality is that's a really small number for our research expenditures. So if you're feeling pressured from me or from someone that the answer to R2 is to write grants, it's not. there are people who are grant active, and what we want to do is better support those faculty. There hasn't been good support for faculty who are interested in grants. And so what we need to do is put those investments out there. So this is another area where we've done significant investments already. So we doubled faculty startup money. We doubled the support for the faculty research grants, whatever those are called.
DRC.
Yeah, double that funding this year. We've increased staffing over to Osper. That's one of the questions about Osper. Are they part of this whole thing? Of course. Osper's been understaffed, and if you're going to increase the grants activity, you better increase that area. So, right, we reorganized the graduate studies office and put Sid Kaza's position over there. And we have lined up 2 new positions, 1 pre, 1 post award, to go out next year. And so there are investments that are going there, but please, if the messaging is that suddenly everyone has to write grants, it's super inappropriate for lots of faculty, and this is not the single measure that we care about or you should care about. And then as to research productivity and what does it mean if I'm already at a high level? Once again, let me just remind everybody that these are departmentally determined standards, as they should be. There's no provost, I mean, probably there are somewhere, they don't last very long, who's gonna funnel into some department and go, you know, your tenure standard, nah, that's not acceptable. And let me see the grant documents. No, I mean, that's probably at an R1 that might happen. But what we're looking to is an R2. And there's certainly no notion, not even the faintest notion, that I or anyone in my office ought to determine what your research standards are. They're gonna vary by discipline. They're gonna be vary by what the department thinks what they want to do as part of this. And so what I want to try to emphasize or get us to, and I hope we'll get there eventually, is to see this as an opportunity and not a burden. And I know that that's going to take some time, and it's going to take us proving it, like with resources. And so if there's departments that, hey, look, we feel we've looked at what our faculty are doing, we're good, and then we're happy with where the research is, we're happy with where the scholarship is. They're good. Write your standards how you want to do them, what you think is effective and what you think is a good standard. You know your disciplines better than I do. So set your departmental standards, be transparent with them. But the only other thing we're saying is, why don't you look at, because now we can have variable teaching loads. Before we couldn't. The system didn't let us. Now they let us. So look at those workloads again. I'm not going to determine individual faculty workload. It would be completely inappropriate. You all should do that in your departments and working with your dean, where we might say that, hey, look, here's somebody who's working on this big old grant and they're doing this activity. They have writing a book. They're writing a play. This year, because I'm in this zone, I really want to focus on this thing. Maybe you can have a reduced teaching load, right? And we all know that in careers, sometimes you're like really focused on research and you're knocking it out of the park. That's your thing. And then you're like, all right, that project's done. And there's kind of a pause. You're like, I got to think about the next project. And so maybe you're not super research active for a couple of years. It might be then appropriate that if you had a 2-3 or a unit 2-2 while you're super research active, you're like, okay, now I'm not. Let's go back to the 3-3, right? Conceivably, there's people who would want to say, look, I don't want any of this. I don't want to do any of this. That's not what I'm hired to do. That's not what I like, and that's not my passion. They should probably stay at a 4-3, and that's all good. That person is just as important a faculty member as the person on the 2-2. So that's where we have to get to, and it's just really important that departments do that work. Inappropriate for me to step in and do that, and I won't. Nor will anybody in my office. So you all dig in. You have those conversations with each other. You set what you think is the proper workload and the variable. And what I would just highly urge is do it with all transparency. Because what poisons the department is when people don't understand why this person has a 2-2 and this person has a 4-3. So you can do it with transparency and collegiality, and that's what I would urge all of you to do. Now, just one last thing, because I know there's department chairs in here. Sometimes you don't have the staffing, right? And this is the other challenge that you have to balance. We need this specific upper level class that only you, Professor X, can teach. Sometimes that's gonna happen, where there's a semester where you're like, oh, I just really need a release for this grant. And the chair's gonna have to make the hard decision and say, listen, I hear you, but we have to teach this class so that students can graduate on time, right? None of this can happen at the expense of students. And so that's the last piece, just to keep in mind, as you're looking at your loads, as you're looking at what you're teaching and looking at your course offerings, you gotta balance all that with making sure students can graduate on time. And it's a big lift, right? It's not easy to do, but I'm confident you can.
All right, let's take a.
From online, there was a question, which you pretty much answered all of it about faculty teaching, getting to a 3-3. But the last part of that question was, for large departments with hundreds of advisees, what are the possibilities of hiring full-time advisors?
Yep, so again, this is a repeat question, and I'll do it again, it's fine. So what we've talked about is that there are a couple departments, and it's a really small number of departments, psychology being one of them, where you have too many advisors. As I said, feel like 30 to 35 advisees, you can probably get through. You get above that, you're in trouble, right? So the psychology department's going, that'd be awesome to have that low, right? So, yes, you can. There are departments that have hired, generally what happens, you hire a lecturer, right? And typically what happens, you hire a lecturer, you give them 3 course releases, and so they teach 1 class, and the rest is an advising load. That's a model that a lot of departments have used. So that, that's one way to get at the problem. Some departments do, a full release. You use the lecturer title, but maybe you can teach 1 class a year or something, and the rest is for advising. The other strategy, of course, is to look at how you might, while you're waiting and you're trying to get this darn lecture in here or 2, maybe. Again, think creatively about advising based on what happens at different levels. So group advising can be a very effective way to advise first-year students and sometimes second year, but certainly first-year students, particularly if it's a highly prescribed major, right? Where you can say, hey, look, everybody spring, you gotta take these classes or pick from these 4 electives and have that conversation. And again, that's not appropriate for every discipline, but there are some where that's effective. Some of the programs over in CBE use peer advisors for those students, right? So you have a few undergrads or graduates that you pay, and they will advise, train them, but they'll advise at that lower level. And then the faculty that are left to have those more detailed discussions about career, grad school, all those sorts of things with juniors and seniors. So there's multiple ways to take the load off, but so, put together what you think works for will work for your department and get a proposal over to your dean, and we'll look to do it.
Let's follow up on the workload. So you said there might be a range of possibilities. Some 3-3 might be sort of typical, but some people are doing research projects and that year could go down from that. And there's some people that might not want to have a very low level of research that might be higher than that.
Yeah.
But is that the message we're giving to new hires, like in current searches? What's the expectation for new people?
Yeah, so I think that the expectation for new hires again will differ slightly by department. So particularly department and what you're hiring them for. I mean, I know that's kind of a lame answer, but the true answer. So for example, the areas that are looking to hire faculty to teach in these new PhD programs, their ads gonna be very different from the ads they did last year, right? They're gonna be looking for very different faculty. So what I would suggest is that any new faculty, I would, as you're trying to recruit them, say, hey, look, we're looking to go to an R2 university. It's research active, not an R1. These are the, but this is where we're gonna be as a university 5-6 years from now. We would love to have you as a part of it. And so, you know, again, one of the great benefits of having a now flexible schedule is I would strongly encourage everybody to look at when you hire new faculty, pre-tenure faculty, say in their first 3 years, I would give all those guys a really slow, period. Right? And you couldn't do that before. Fisher was, but they're creative, right? They're kind of sneaking around and doing these things. So, and that's also, by the way, the little secret here is we've always had variable teaching load at TU, always, just didn't know it. And so now we're talking about it, making it an option that's available for more departments and to deploy that strategically. So I would really encourage people to look at that and think about how, again, depending on your discipline, what you think is appropriate as you're looking through the portfolio of your faculty, you're thinking where, you know, a graduate program might emerge or something like that. Those are the faculty you might target for new positions. So again, you all think about the language that works for you. But it's really just important to understand that an R2 is really not the big lift that people think. So the guy who was just talking, the plenary speaker over at the research conference, the title of his presentation was becoming something like the accidental R2 university. Yeah, Montclair, they accidentally, one day they looked at the data and like, huh, we're an R2. TU would be an R2 today if they spent $1 million more in research in 2016. We'd be an R2 right now with no other changes, no changes. So it really isn't as world changing. It doesn't have to be. Let me put it that. It doesn't have to be as world changing as people think it is. It's really nudges that we're talking about here, and it doesn't require a wholesale change of every faculty member in every department. It really doesn't.
I have two questions. One's really easy.
I like those.
I know. So what happens when, so I'm nearly done with my advising, but I have so many that have an honors college advisor, a psych advisor, fringe advisor. Who does the advising?
That's an excellent question. I don't know, to be honest with you.
Because
What do we do? So it's somebody who's got 3 majors? What are they?
You can have an honors college, you can have a double majors, and you'll have a psych, and you'll have a fringe. So who does the advising? Who's responsible for?
I feel like we should have a giant wrestling match or something. I mean, that's a great question. It's,
Like this. So it's.
does anyone know the answer? I mean, honestly, I don't know the answer, but
You advise for your major or you advise for honors.
yeah, but does the student have, are you asking, does the student have to go to 4 people?
Well, who do you, so, no, it's like, if I lift the whole, which I do, so I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
And I would, I'll advise them. But I was like talking to my friend Don McTagan, I'm like, dude, I lift up and advise these whole, but they're also your advising. He's like, now what? I mean, because I can't advise on poli sci. I mean, I can go, my name, oh.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, the question is like, I actually love advising. It is so much work if you do it right.
Yep.
And we have to have an honest conversation about that too, because I can phone it in or I can do a good job.
Yeah.
And so, but what I'm seeing is that we are advising, I've already advised 3 students that weren't my students, but they want to re-enroll in TAFs. What do I do then? And I think we want them to re-enroll because we want more students.
Sure.
So now I'm at 40 students that I've advised already. And so I am okay with removing the holds when they have all these different advisors, but then I'm afraid like, so it basically seems like the first person to contact the student.
Yeah.
So then what happens is, and I'm getting a lot of students now that are not my students, but not my advisees, who are like, I haven't heard from my advisor yet. And I have to register for class on November 8th. What do I do? And I'm like, well, and I created a Discord for my advisees, a Discord server. So we meet on the Discord and we post, and I'm like, this is my DCP, fill it out, send it back. But these are the kinds of conversations in terms of, especially because it goes hand in hand with research productivity. And it's like, if you're over advising, and then I am not a sprinter. I hate last minute crap. I have to do things slowly but surely because I don't like being overwhelmed. So that means I'm nearly done with advising. But then that also means that I've lifted the holds on all of these people that have other advisors. And so then those advisors want me to advise, which is fine. But again, these are the kinds of conversations. I don't think anybody realized that this was going to happen. or that you have students who are not your advisees, but like you, or feel
Sure.
that you can give them better advice, so then I'm now I'm at 50. And I was at 50 last year, but I had a course release for that, and now I don't have a course release. So that's my first question. My second is, I'm really curious on how I could get a course reduction. Because I have written 5 grants in the last 18 months.
So talk to your department chair. I mean, that's so, well,
What's the, I don't know what the process, I mean, I think we'd like to know like what the process is to get to that point. Because I'm about to write another grant, and I want to know like where I can find these different mechanisms.
So, you know, that's a great question. So, and some people have gotten this, very few. It's exactly what the provost said, it works in the department chair. So the department chair then talks to me and we have a conversation with us, right? And so that's how it happens. There's no formal process, but you do have to have a conversation. Because if you or anyone else has any kind of reassignment for any reason, we have to fill that spot in the classroom. So it's always that way. Just like the provost said earlier, sometimes faculty are maybe the only person who can teach the class, and they don't teach it, and whatever else they're assigned to, students won't complete on that. So I mean, there are many factors that I'm not aware of, but once the chair comes to me, then I'm pretty willing to go along with it, because at that point, I know the chair says, yes, I can fill that class. Yes, this is, I look at what the work is that's being proposed, and then we work it out. At that point, it's more or less me saying yes or no, and if I say yes, how are we gonna pay for it? So we still have to pay for it.
So we request on the, I mean, because then like,
Your chair first, and then the chair will talk.
and I do grants. And I want to go.
so, right.
One of them is going to.
Yeah. So, so in addition
That
to
is what I've talked about, excuse me, as an incentive, right? I've said this, over the last year. These are the incentives to get people who are interested in grant writing to write grants. They also offer and support, not many, a couple last summer for small stipends in the summer to write grant proposals. We hope they succeed, but we know that many grants take multiple rewrites and resubmissions. So, maybe you get a little more money for the rewrite, but so far no one's asked. I'd have to think about that much.
I was just curious, like, I get what you're saying and it's awesome. I'm not like arguing.
that's good.
I don't think there's transparency in how, like,
Yeah.
5 grants is a lot of grants. At some point, someone has to give me money. Come on.
Yeah.
But I also don't think there's any transparency on how to say,
So it's a-
read advising 50 people and going after grants. It's morale crushing.
Yeah. So I
So
agree. I
what
get
do
it.
I do to get that?
Can I go back to your other question? You know, a college advisor, should you find yourself in a position like that, by all means, contact help.
I was also gonna point to the advising center that's
Yeah.
now in the library. There's
Yeah.
a bunch of professional advisors there that are ready to do just-in-time advising.
Yeah.
Now, they are just, the limits on their ability is that, like, you don't know the nuances of what a flu science, they're not gonna know the nuances of the upper level things, but, how do I drop a pass? How do I do
I
this?
also want that to colleagues, like, oh, by the way, I removed you.
Sure.
Hold on your.
No, it's I remember that dilemma too, and honestly, I don't know what the heck the solution is, but I'm gonna ask our team and see what they would recommend on that.
But
But
which
to-
was the college advisor?
Yeah.
College advisor practices discipline. The college advisor is constantly in contact. College advisor would reach out to that department if that's an issue that you have. That's why we have a college
There's
advisor.
a lot, I mean, it's not.
I'm just telling you the strategy.
Yeah, it's-
That's real, and so we need to move on.
We have to have.
Yeah.
We have a lot of other questions.
But just a
So-
quick question on the
Okay.
course releases, also, I'd strongly encourage, as I said, we doubled the money on the FDRC. Put course releases in there, apply for money to support course release.
That's real.
Because what you wanna do is go to your department chair and have a solution. Say, hey, here's the thing, the class that I wanna drop is hopefully one that you're confident we can get an adjunct for, right? Or something like that, or this professor can cover it. I've already talked to her and she'll do that upper level class. So I can get this release and then FDRC is a great way to get that course release money. And then, sometimes.
Okay, so we have another question, and
Yeah.
actually it's there were a couple people that inquired about the academic leadership survey. And the questions kind of revolved around Are there measures that are going to be taken? Is there going to be a professional development plan? Kind of what's next as a result of that academic leadership survey? That's the questions that they were over.
Yeah, so I'll respond in this way. I mean, I read the leadership surveys from everybody. I read this survey about me, and the president, everybody else, all the deans, everybody in my office. So I had the opportunity to read all those things. And so for every dean, every AVP, president, everyone on the president's cabinet. And so as a general rule, I'm just not gonna talk about personnel issues. That's just my reaction to that. I will, but what I assure you is I, of course, read these things and look at other analyses of anybody who is a report to me. And so, but in terms of, am I gonna address any specific personnel? No. Nor would you want me to do it about any of you, I'm sure. So, yeah, that's my general response to that.
Okay, thank you. There were also a number of questions, because quite frankly, we're not out of COVID. I mean, the bottom line is COVID is still here, it's with us. And so there were concerns about whether or not Towson is there a threshold at which Towson is going to resume COVID protections? Is there a mask policy that we can potentially adopt? Why did we drop the vaccine requirements? And question around that.
Sure.
Issue.
We'll take the last question first. So the reason we dropped the vaccine requirement is because the law said we had to. So this has a little history of that vaccination. The reason we were able to require vaccination was that the governor had declared a state of emergency. And so legally, when the governor declared the state of emergency, we could take emergency action. And what the state said is that requiring vaccine under a state of emergency was okay. So there were legal challenges to it. In fact, 2 Towson University students were the plaintiffs in a lawsuit about challenging that. And I'm happy to say they lost. So we were able to do that. The governor then lifted the state of emergency. And when he did that, there was no legal recourse for the university or any university in any public university in Maryland to require vaccination. So the vaccination is actually legislated, believe it or not. So the vaccines that your kids have to take to go to public school are in their state, they're legislatively mandated, and COVID is not one of them. And so we legally cannot do it. So that's a question to that. As far as masking, I saw somebody said, why don't we do what UMBC's masking policy is? UMBC modeled their masking policy after ours. So they started the summer with the plan of making continuing masks being mandatory in classrooms. Before the semester began, they very quietly lifted that and said it was optional. And so what we've said on that is it is optional, but if certainly faculty, anybody can say, hey, listen, I would appreciate, I've got a young kid at home, whatever, you don't have to even explain yourself. I would appreciate if people would wear masks in my class. Students are quite responsive to that. Not everyone is going to be, but if you're in that position, you certainly can ask that. You can make that request in the department meeting, wherever you want to do it. And what I just say is, we still have stashes of masks everywhere. If you want students to mask up and request that, maybe have some masks for them. And if there's a department that needs another distribution of those, we're happy to do it.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question in here? Go to anything on chat? I can go to another one.
There's a hand.
Hand.
Startup funds, and I'm wondering about, particularly as we move to R2, you mentioned earlier that the startup funds have doubled.
Yeah.
Is this something that is shared with the college and the provost office and the department? Is it split?
Yes.
Is that true across colleges? And I don't know if that's true here.
So there is a in terms of who has to contribute what, there is a split. The reality is that the bulk of departmental and college level startup funds come from indirect cost recovery. So it's you gotta get grants to get that, to have that pot of money to do the startups. So we actually then require more out of Fisher, like that dean has to contribute a lot in terms of startups, because they have the indirect costs, they have that money sitting there. And he's expected, or she, who knows, going forward, is expected to use that money towards that. And then we come in, I think, I don't know the exact percentage. At least 50% comes from the provost office, right? So every time there's a grant, there's indirect costs you put in there. And what happens is there's a split. So some goes to the faculty, some goes to the department, some goes to the dean, some goes to the provost office, and then some goes to the central budget of the university. So those are the pots that are out there. So if you're a super research active department, your IDC, your pot's bigger. That's a long way of saying, we have set aside a pot that has nothing to do with indirect costs. And so if those needs are growing, just let us know. We already know that we double it, and we already know that we're trying to triple it. So, and that's just because the faculty that people are recruiting now
So,
they're
Gary,
expecting.
that's in line with what I told you in the search committee yesterday. So it's basically double for the dollar amount, but what's variable is if people need equipment, computers, software, which everyone doesn't, but that's gone up significantly last year, and I would anticipate it going up. But that's where it stands. So it's a little bit more individualized than, I just want to make that.
Oh yeah, so if you're recruiting a new faculty, you should ask them, hey, what kind of startup package you need? Because I mean, some people are like in the $25,000 range, and there's others that are in the.
It depends on the reason.
Yeah, some people are like, I need an electron microscope. I'm like, So,
Sometimes we can get donors, and I know that we had some start money just before I started for people in a certain department, and that was expensive equipment, which now needs updating and replacing. My understanding was that, I know they can't. That's not likely to happen in a timely manner. Someone says, oh, I need 25,000, and we just happen to have a donor. I don't know how that, but that's how we got it, and it's been very effective.
A question came up where they asked about the majority, we talk about the majority minority campus. But in reality, this individual indicated that in the first year courses that the majority of the majority minority of students of color were not from Baltimore City. So they suggest that is this a problem that needs to be addressed, considering that Towson was the first normal school in Baltimore. Well, at Lafayette Square, West Baltimore. So it's a question of the majority minority campus, but the majority of the minority are.
right, yeah, I totally get that, I totally get the question, and the enrollment management people be thrilled to hear that question.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right, whoever asked this question, that Towson University has not, in general, in the past, really focused on Baltimore City as a strong recruiting area. So I will tell you, without any prompting whatsoever, our new enrollment management guy said, what are we doing? right there's the city. It's we should get in there. We shouldn't sort of cede this to other universities. And so they hired somebody who specifically is going out into the city. We've done a ton of work, combinations with student affairs in terms of getting out into the high school, doing programs, bringing people onto our campus. And so the university is absolutely committing, I would like to say recommitting, but that ain't true. Well, we're committing to the students of, Baltimore City.
Didn't we have a top 10 program?
It was a big push.
I mean,
Big multiple, like, that 1972,
Yeah.
directed of all who's one from the 80s, there's one from the 90s.
Right,
So they're actually multiple.
right.
It's not racist.
Not racist.
Yeah,
Right,
so
but
we're,
obviously.
we're going back in, right? And we, why it was abandoned, I have no idea, but it was not a good decision.
And I think one of the last questions was the GIVE program, the grant writing and valued environments, and what was the sense of how BTU will or will not grow or be supported in the next few years.
Yeah, so BTU, I know it's continued the same support. It's obviously a presidential priority. It's always good to be a presidential priority. You know, when you look at a $22 million drop in enrollment in at some universities, you start looking around and go, what are the luxuries we have that we should cut, right, to get that gas? Nothing, not a dollar was cut from BTU. And so that should signal, I hope, the commitment to it. And one of the lessons we talk about Baltimore City and our commitment to BTU. One of the things we know that was done incorrectly in the past is going in and doing these one-off things. You go in there, you say, here we are from Towson and we're here to fix things. And we wouldn't talk to anybody about what they thought. And then you do a thing and you leave. Right? BTU is a commitment. It's a long-standing commitment. And it's not a one-off. So I think that the whole university should be super proud of it because they're doing it right. And so the commitment is obviously still there, 100%.
Thank you. We actually have one announcement that I wanted to have both on in person as well as the online individual to know about. Our committee on DEIJ was going to announce something that they were doing. In the meantime, you certainly thank you very much for you being here, and any questions that weren't addressed that were sent anonymously. The provost has indicated that they will follow up. So I was
She's gonna say which ones we didn't answer, and then I'll send back to you. my
Yes,
answers,
yes,
I guess.
and I'll post.
And so if there's other things that came up also during the course of today that you're like, I really wish I had been able to ask X, Y, Z. You can either directly email me, always happy to do that. But if you feel uncomfortable doing that, once you email Maria
It's
and
the
then,
anonymous link. Just
yes,
I'm
send her,
filling
she'll
out.
send it to me without your name on it, and then I'll get some kind of response out.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right,
Thank you very much. Appreciate
thanks,
it.
everybody.
Have a good weekend. So Halcyon Lawrence is going to give us just a brief announcement.
Yes, I will not take too much of your time. I am here in the capacity of the Dean's Fellow for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Justice. I also sit as a non-voting member on the college level DEI committee, and we are at a point in this work in diversity, equity, and inclusion where the college is interested in having deeper conversations, honest conversations about where we're at as a college and how do we move forward. And so I'm working along with Sandra Lear, who chairs the DEI committee, as well as along with Chris, to be able to put on a workshop. Haven't figured out the word that I feel comfortable using to describe what we're trying to do, because we're still in the process of figuring that out. But working with the Vice Provost's office as well to be able to put on a workshop during the mini-master. We don't yet know numbers and how many people can be accommodated because it is a workshop and there are some constraints on numbers, but it may provide us with an opportunity to have a sequence of these workshops. So I just wanted to plant that to let the college know that that is something that's coming up in January. That once we figure out how many people we can facilitate, we're saying to you, if at this stage you're already thinking that's something that I would like to be a part of. One of the reasons that we're wanting to do it is to be able to assess where we're at as a college. And so thinking about our strengths, thinking about our weaknesses, thinking about the opportunities that we might have with regard to student retention, with regard to faculty hiring and retention and so on. So if that's something that already has sparked sort of, I'd like to be part of this conversation, we're asking if you can reach out to your representative. Each department has a representative that sits in the DEI committee. They are going to be the first ones to know what we're planning, and you can ask those questions, or you can reach out to Sandra there or reach out to me directly and let us know. I will be giving you some more information as the plans are developed. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll see you on November 16th at 9 o'clock for the third 10. Yeah, President.